Hi dear children, today let's enjoy a new story. The name of the story is Cop and the Anthem. Do you know what's the meaning of cop or what's the meaning of anthem? The cop and the title is of course a policeman. Anthem, what is the meaning of anthem? The anthem is the music being played by the organist inside the church. Church anthems are always intended to inspire good thoughts in the listeners. And this particular one had an especially strong effect on Soapy. Soapy is the main character of this story, the Cop and the Anthem. Dear children, the story The Cop and the Anthem is a December 1904 short story by the United States author O. Henry. His real name is William Sidney Porter, but he was known as O. Henry. It's his pen name or pseudonym. He was born in Greensboro, North Carolina, United States on 11th September 1862 and died in June 1910. His famous works are The Gift of the Magi, The Last Leaf, After 20 Years, The Ransom of Red Chief, etc. So dear children, let's get into the story, The Cop and the Anthem. This story is a blend of humor, tragedy, and motivation. Would one ever want to be in jail? If yes, what could be the possible reasons? A poor guy Soapy wishes his winter to be spent in jail so that he would have food, shelter, and warmth. Let me read the story. The Cop and the Anthem. Soapy moved restlessly on his seat in Madison Square. There are certain signs to show that winter is coming. Birds begin to fly south. People want new warm coats. And Soapy moves restlessly on his seat in the park. When you see these signs, you know that winter is near. A dead leaf fell at Soapy's feet. That was a special sign for him that winter was coming. It was time for all who lived in Madison Square to prepare. Soapy's mind now realized that fact. The time had come. He had to find some way to take care of himself during the cold weather, and therefore he moved restlessly on his seat. Soapy's hopes for the winter were not very high. He was not thinking of sailing away on a ship. He was not thinking of southern skies or of the Bay of Naples. 3 months in the prison on Blackwell's Island was what he wanted. 3 months of food every day and a bed every night. 3 months safe from the cold north wind and safe from cops. This is what Soapy wanted most in the world. For years, Blackwell's Island had been his winter home. Richer New Yorkers made their plans to go to Florida or to the shore of the Mediterranean Sea each winter. Soapy made his small plans for going to the island, and now the time had come. 3 big newspapers, some under his coat and some over his legs, had not kept him warm during the night in the park. So Soapy was thinking of the island. There were places in the city where he could go and ask for food and a bed. These would be given to him. He could move from one building to another, and he would be taken care of through the winter. But he liked Blackwell's Island better. Soapy's spirit was proud. If he went to any of these places, there were certain things he had to do, in one way or another. He would have to pay for what they gave him. They would not ask him for money. They would make him wash his whole body. They would make him answer questions. They would want to know everything about his life. No, prison was better than that. The prison had rules that he would have to follow. But in prison, a gentleman's own life was still his own life. Soapy, having decided to go to the island, at once began to move towards his desire. Dear children, the story, The Cop and the Anthem, is a humorous story. Soapy the vagabond was jobless as well as homeless. He was restless because of the signs of approaching winters. These signs were birds began to fly south, people wanted new warm coats, dead leaves fell on the ground. These are some of the signs of approaching winter. These signals made him fearful of the approaching winters. As much he had a desire for shelter during the winter period, he came to choose Blackwell's Island prison instead of other places like the Southern Skies or Bay of Naples. He will get food, shelter, and warmth. Consequently, he tried to get arrested for the winter season duration. What will be his plans? Let's read. There were many easy ways of doing this. The most pleasant way was to go and have a good dinner at some fine restaurant. Then he would say that he had no money to pay, and then a cop would be called. It would all be done very quietly. The cop would arrest him. He would be taken to a judge. The judge would do the rest. Soapy left his seat and walked slowly out of Madison Square to the place where the great street called Broadway and Fifth Avenue meet. He went across this wide space and started north on Broadway. He stopped at a large and brightly lighted restaurant. This was where the best food and the best people in the best clothes appeared every evening. Soapy believed that above his legs he looked all right, his face was clean, his coat was good enough. If he could get to a table, he believed that success would be his. The part of him that would be seen above the table would look all right. The waiter would bring him what he asked for. He began thinking of what he would like to eat. In his mind, he could see the whole dinner. The cost would not be too high. He didn't want the restaurant people to feel any real anger. But the dinner would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter home. But as Soapy put his foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter saw his broken old shoes and the torn clothes that covered his legs. Strong and ready hands turned Soapy around and moved him quietly and quickly outside again. What was Soapy's plan? Soapy then made an attempt to get himself arrested. His first plan was to eat at a fine restaurant and then say that he had no money. Soapy thought that this would send him to Blackwell's prison for 3 months. With this plan in mind, Soapy came to a restaurant where only the wealthy people came every evening. But his plan didn't work because the head waiter saw the broken shoes and the torn clothes of Soapy, and so he was stopped at the door of the restaurant by the waiter. He turned Soapy around and made him leave the place quickly and quietly. Okay, he failed in that plan. See the next plan. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that this most easy way to the island was not to be his. He must think of some other way of getting there. At a corner of 6th Avenue was a shop with a wide glass window, bright with electric lights. Soapy picked up a big stone and threw it through the glass. People came running around the corner. A cop was the first among them. Soapy stood still and he smiled when he saw the cop. "Where's the man that did that?" asked the cop. "Don't you think that I might have done it?" said Soapy innocently. He was friendly and happy. What he wanted was coming towards him. But the cop's mind would not consider Soapy. Men who break windows do not stop there to talk to cops. They ran away as fast as they can. The cop saw a man further along the street running. He ran after him, and Soapy, sick at heart, walked slowly away. He had failed 2 times. He had another idea to break a glass window with a stone. So he picked up a big stone and threw it through the glass. People came running around the corner. But Soapy stopped after seeing a policeman arriving there. But he didn't consider Soapy as the person who threw the stone at the window glass, because no criminal would stand after doing so and talk to the police. So he ran after a man who was running along the street. Soapy failed again. Then let's move on to other paragraphs. Across the street was another restaurant. It was not so fine as the one on Broadway. The people who went there were not so rich. Its food was not so good. Into this, Soapy took his old shoes and his torn clothes, and no one stopped him. He sat down at a table and was soon eating a big dinner. When he had finished, he said that he had no money. Get busy and call a police, said Soapy, and don't keep a gentleman waiting. No cop for you, said the waiter. He called another waiter. The two waiters threw Soapy upon his left ear on the hard street outside. Poor Soapy. After that, Soapy finds a cheap restaurant which was not so fine, and the people who went there were not rich and food was not so good. He wanted to try his initial plan on. He got in and ate a yummy meal. When he revealed he couldn't pay for the meal, the waiter refused to call the cops and tossed Soapy out on his ear instead. Okay, again our Soapy failed. Then what he will do? He stood up slowly, one part at a time, and beat the dust from his clothes. Prison seemed only a happy dream. The island seemed very far away. A cop who was standing near laughed and walked away. Soapy started moving again. When he stopped, he was near several theatres. In this part of the city, streets are brighter and hearts are more joyful than in other parts. Women and men in rich warm coats moved happily in the winter air. A sudden fear caught Soapy. No cop was going to arrest him. Then he came to another cop standing in front of a big theatre. He thought of something else to try. He began to shout as if he had too much to drink. His voice was as loud as he could make it. He danced, he cried out, and the cop turned his back to Soapy and said to a man standing near him, "It's one of those college boys. He won't hurt anything. We have orders to let them shout." Soapy was quiet. Was no cop going to touch him? He began to think of the island as if it were as far away as a star. He pulled his thin coat around him. The wind was very cold. Then Soapy became sad. Prison seemed only a happy dream for him. A sudden fear caught him because no cop was going to arrest him. Then he came to another cop who was standing in front of a big theatre. He made another attempt for his arrest. This time he began shouting like a drunk man in front of the theatre. The cop thought that he was a college boy and hence left him. Poor Soapy. Then he saw a man in a shop buying a newspaper. The man's umbrella stood beside the door. Soapy stepped inside the shop, took the umbrella, and walked slowly away. The man followed him quickly. "My umbrella," he said. "Oh, is it?" said Soapy. "Why don't you call a cop?" "I took it." "Your umbrella? Why don't you call a cop? There is one standing at the corner." The man walked more slowly. Soapy did the same, but he had a feeling that he was going to fail again. The cop looked at the two men. "I," said the umbrella man, "that is, you know how these things happen. If that's your umbrella, I'm very sorry. I found it this morning in a restaurant. If you say it's yours, I hope you will." "It's mine," cried Soapy with anger in his voice. The umbrella man hurried away. The cop helped a lady across the street. Soapy walked east. He threw the umbrella as far as he could throw it. He talked to himself about cops and what he thought of them. Because he wished to be arrested, they seemed to believe he was like a king who could do no wrong. Then Soapy gave up all hopes of getting arrested. He wanted to go back. So the Soapy saw a man in a shop buying a newspaper. And the man's umbrella stood beside the door. He was buying a newspaper. Then Soapy came to the decision of stealing it, the umbrella. Soapy then took the umbrella and the man kept following him. Soapy then told him to call the cop who was standing at a corner. The man refused to call the cop because he himself had stolen the umbrella. He confessed that he actually found the umbrella and that could well be Soapy's, so he didn't call over the policeman watching them. Okay, again our Soapy failed in it. So Soapy did what? He threw the umbrella as far as he could throw it, and he uttered some words to himself and went away. At last, Soapy came to one of the quiet streets on the side of the city. He turned here and began to walk south toward Madison Square. He was going home, although home was only a seat in a park. But at a very quiet corner, Soapy stopped. Here was his old childhood home. Through one window, he could see a soft light shining. That had been his living room, where he had spent many happy, peaceful moments. Sweet music came to Soapy's ears and seemed to hold him there. The moon was above, peaceful and bright. There were few people passing. He could hear birds high above him, and the music that came from the room held Soapy there, for he had known it well long ago. In those days his life contained such things as mothers and flowers and high hopes and friends and clean thoughts and clean clothes. There was a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. He saw with sick fear how he had fallen. He saw his worthless days, his wrong desires, his dead hopes, the lost power of his mind, and also in a moment his heart answered this change in his soul. He would fight to change his life. He would pull himself up out of the mud. He would make a man of himself again. There was time. He was young enough. He would find his old purpose in life and follow it. That sweet music had changed him. Tomorrow he would find work. A man had once offered him a job. He would find that man tomorrow. He would be somebody in the world. Soapy felt a hand on his arm. He looked quickly around into the broad face of a cop. "What are you doing hanging around here?" asked the cop. "Nothing," said Soapy. "You think I believe that?" said the cop. Full of his new strength, Soapy began to argue, and it is not wise to argue with a New York cop. "Come along," said the cop. 3 months prison on Blackwell's Island, said the judge to Soapy next morning. See, Soapy then gave up all hopes of getting arrested. He wanted to go back. On the way, he came to a quiet street with a church on it. He heard a beautiful anthem. Anthem means religious hymn in this case, being played on an organ coming from the church. He knew the anthem, and it reminded him of past days when he had family. He thought about his childhood days. The anthem created a huge change in Soapy's soul. He realized that he could have a better life than this. Inspired and feeling empowered, he began making plans for the future. First thing, he needed a job. Lucky for him, he even knew where he could probably get one. The next day, he would go and get that job and work toward the dream and goals he used to have. He decided to fight the challenges of life. Just then, a cop came there, and he asked Soapy that what he was doing there. Soapy then began to argue with him due to his new confidence. However, the cop took him, and the judge gave him 3 months prison sentence on Blackwell's Island. So, my dear children, the Cop and the Anthem tell us that in spite of the wrong things we do, there are times when we can realize our wrongdoings and change our lives. Hope you loved the story. Let's move on to the questions of this story. First one, what are some of the signs of approaching winter referred to in the text? The signs are birds began to fly south, people wanted new warm coats, dead leaves fell on the ground, etc. Okay, next one, write true or false against each of the following. Soapy did not want to go to prison. False. Soapy had been to prison several times. True. It was not possible for Soapy to survive in the city through the winter. True. Soapy hated to answer questions of a personal nature. True. See the next question. What was Soapy's first plan? Why did it not work? Soapy's first plan was to eat at an expensive restaurant and tell that he didn't have money to pay for that. They would call the cops, and the cops will take him to jail. It was his first plan. Then what happened to his plan? Why did it not work? The plan didn't work because he was stopped at the door of the restaurant by the head waiter. He turned Soapy around and made him leave the place quickly and quietly. The next question, but the cop's mind would not consider Soapy. What did the cop not consider and why? Cop didn't consider Soapy as the person who threw the stone at the window glass because no criminal would stand after doing so and talk to the cop. Then, fifth one, we have orders to let them shout. What is the policeman referring to? The policeman was referring to the orders for not arresting the shouting college students. Then write true or false against each of the following. Soapy stole a man's umbrella. True. The owner of the umbrella offered to give it to Soapy. True. The man had stolen the umbrella that was now Soapy's. True. Soapy threw away the umbrella. True. Then there was a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. What brought about the change in Soapy? Soapy stood in front of the house where he had spent his childhood. He was reminded of his mother, the sweet music he used to enjoy in his room, and the decent life he used to have back then. He decided that he will work and be somebody in life. These are the question answers you should know. Let's wind up today's class. Thank you.